One of my realizations is that identity is quote unquote not meant to be identified with, ironically, and rather it is more helpful to give them their space, to give them their own, you can say, identity instead of possessing it, grabbing it, or conquering it. Imagine a hand covering over it, trying to own it or possess it, merging with it, right? When this happens, then the quote unquote phenomenon of ego doership happens. We are identified with the identity. We are in total mergence with it. We are in quote unquote colonizing of it, right? And so in my previous recordings, I talk about usership versus doership. The idea of usership, you can notice that there's already distance. You are in using, right? You're not it. You are in using of it. There's no mergence of identity. And what I noticed is that that's a, you can say, a more fruitful relationship, type of relationship with identity instead of possessive mergence with it. When you use a tool or when there's something that you're always using or that's very useful for you, you take care of it, right? You tend to it. You take care of it. Like a garden. If your garden gives you food, you tend to it, right? You take care of it. You charge it, you invest in it, you give it energy, and in return, it feeds you back. It gives you feeding. It gives you back, right? There is this you can say circuitry. There's this exchange of energy. You feed it, you give to it, then it gives you back. There's this flow that's happening. And so I've also mentioned the idea of devotion in my previous recordings. The tricky thing with the word devotion is that the mind goes into images of monasteries and temples and whatnot. But it's more like an everyday practical thing. It's kind of like tending to the garden or something that provides you goods or benefit, right? You take care of it. How I approach the idea of devotion, or in my experience, devotion is like in simple things, such as when you're having a meal, instead of unconsciously scarfing it down or inhaling the food to get to gratification, to get to satiation, there is a kind of consciousness to it, a kind of sense of dedication to the act of eating. It's like it's dedicated to that. There is this layer of, you can say, charging of that. It's like you're in recognition of the presence of that. And by that I mean, you could say, the stream of preference or true nature quality, let's say, or the construct of your intention. There's a kind of dedicatedness or the sense of charging it. This reminds me of the microbiome. Now, the microbiome is the bacteria in our gut. A number of doctors and nutritionists recommend to feed our microbiome. And in return, they give us nutrients and metabolic and immune support. It plays a vital role in our overall health, right? So they say that you eat for two. You eat for you and for the microbiome. This reminds me of that, you know, when there is the care for something, when there is the recognition that something benefits you, right? Or something is serving you, then you serve it too, right? You take care of it. And so, with regard to the idea of identity, I realized that the same applies. Again, it's like a circuitry, like a reciprocal circuitry. It's like an exchange of energy, like the microbiome. When you feed the microbiome with fiber or good stuff, then it gives you back the beneficial stuff, right? It feeds back to you. You charge it and it gives back. The same with identity. When you relate with it in this kind of mutually feeding reciprocity or charging loop, you can say, or charging circuitry, then you step back from it. That's how you engage with it instead of merging with it in tight possessive identification. Instead of identifying with identity, you use it. You are in usership, you are in charging of it, you are in feeding of it. And of course, in return, it feeds back to you. That's the effect that you get. Another analogy that came to mind is the story or allegory of the long spoons, wherein people cannot feed themselves using long spoons. And they realize that in order to feed themselves is to feed the other, right? Is to feed one another. And so again, there is this circuitry, right? You feed another and the other feeds you. There is this circuitry, there's this reciprocal circuitry. There is not this myopic position or perspective of just confined in this one body, you can say. Like imagine when you're confined in an identity, and let's say that's a box. And since there is mergence with it, there's myopic mergence with it, then the view is only confined to that one box. But when you step back from the identity, you can say now there's two boxes because you've unmerged yourself from the identity. There's now you and the other box, the identity box, right? And now there's this circuitry that's happening between the two boxes, right? You're charging it and it's feeding you back. It's the experience that you get. You charge it and it's the experience that you get. But you're no longer identified with it, right? You're not treating it as if it's your whole, your whole beingness. That's why you can say there's a sense of expandedness, but only because there is non myopia. There is non mergence with a certain identity. Another picture that I thought of is the game of chess. The pawns are at the front line, right? They are you can say, in a vulnerable position. They are at the forefront. And so when you're identified with the pawn, that's how it feels, right? It feels like you are unsafe, you're vulnerable, you're in a place of danger, you're at the mercy of the world, and you're open for all kinds of attack and whatnot. And that's because you are in identification with the pawn. But when you realize that, oh, that's not the case, you are the player that is in using of the pawn, and anything that happens within the chessboard doesn't have anything to do with you. right? You're safe and sound, you can say, as the player. And so there wouldn't be that kind of, needing to constantly be in a state of guardedness or defense, right? Because that which is getting attacked or diminished has nothing to do with you. And in fact, there's only that sense only if you're in identification with an identity. That's a time that you can say there's a sense of diminishment or suffering that arises when there is identification. When there is identification with the identity. When you don't identify with the identity is fine, without your identification. It's only when there is this tight mergence with it that all kinds of suffering happens. In my observation, all human suffering is caused by, you can say, an erroneous treatment or an ignorant approach, you can say. And so, yeah, basically it's living in valuing of something. When you value something, you give it your attention. You recognize, you honor its presence. You give attention, you charge it. There's a feeding of it. Again, just like tending to a garden, right? You give attention to it. You honor its presence. There is this quote unquote devotion to it. And so if there is a preferred stream or a preferred construct or identity, you can say, then you tend to it. You honor it, you recognize its presence. You, you give space, there is appreciation for it instead of possessing it, conquering it, dominating it. It's the complete opposite of the ego tendency. Egoic tendency is always closed fist. And of course, the ego is really the diametric opposite of usership. The ego, how it thinks that the way to get fed is to trample the other, right? Is to abuse the other. It's to squash the other, to elevate itself, to inflate itself. It's kind of like the person with the long spoon thinking that in order to be able to feed himself, he should squash the other. He should trample upon, he should destroy the other. But in reality, it's giving, not squashing or taking away or trampling or conquering. It's giving. It's a feeding game. The directionality is give, is express, is giving. When you put a closed fist in front of a mirror, what you reflected back is also a closed fist, right? Open your hand and you receive as well. What you get is also giving, givingness, right? And so to summarize, it's basically not identifying with an identity. Ironically, identity is not meant to be identified with, but rather to be used. You use an identity. The doer is not meant to be identified with. You use the doer, right? You see the expandedness of it. There is now a wider field. Instead of being confined in mergence with the identity or the doer, there's now the user, you can say, the using, the consciousness awareness, and the identity, and the doer, right? There's now the player and the pawn. Instead of being confined in mergence with the pawn, we are this undepletable energy, consciousness, isness. We are eternal beingness. And we get to choose the broadcast that we give honoring to, that we give attention to, that we charge, that we use, you can say. And that's one of the features of the human experience is choice, right? We get to choose. We get you can say, the privilege of tending to which garden, because none of the identities are us wholly. We are not just the identity. We are the isness wholeness that are in expressing or in giving mileage to a certain frequency or broadcast or stream or identity construct, right? And so you can say that these are functionalities, these streams or these broadcasts are functions. They're not like an identity that defines our wholeness or well-being or our whole selfness, right? How I see it is that it's a function. It's a way to operate in this world, because you can't just be a nobody, a motionless energy in this world, right? You cannot just be, you can say, pure isness in this world. That will be very dysfunctional. In the earth human experience, there's functioning required, or it's the natural way of things. You can say that practicality and functionality is a huge deal in the human experience. You get to have the privilege. You get to have the privilege of availing or of partaking of or enjoying of the frequency or stream of your preference, right? You are in receiving of it instead of the myopic place of lack. And it's not here. And I have to go get it. I have to go get there. I'm not in enjoyment of it. I'm not in availing of it. I am in lack of it. It's the opposite of the ego doer position. There is the shifting from the front seat to the back seat. You get to be in, availing of. You get to be in using of that, what you value, the stream of preference or construct or the frequency or broadcast that you value, that you like, that you value, that is your preference. And you'll notice when you're in this non-myopic state of tending, of charging, of being in usership, the state or direction is, you can say, building, integration. Like when you're tending to a garden, the idea or the orientation is building, growing the garden. So the directionality is in line with wholeness, right? As opposed to when one is confined in the ego doer, then the orientation is lack and need, right? Needing to consume, needing to fill, needing to possess or whatever. There is the honoring, there's the honoring of the presence of the garden, let's say. There's the recognition or acknowledgement, honoring, right, of the presence, of its presence. As opposed to when one is confined in doership, in the ego doership, then one is lost in the idea of lack and separation. It's the opposite, instead of honoring or reverence for presence, acknowledgement, there is the dishonoring of it. There is the disacknowledgement of presence, the turning away from it.